Okay, so we know that when you leave competitive markets alone, they're efficient. You get the efficient outcome. You get all surplus realized. So you can see in this market, if we leave the market alone, if we let price move freely, it will find its way to that free market equilibrium, as we've seen how markets operate. It will find its way to that free market equilibrium where supply intersects demand at P0, Q0, all potential surplus is realized. That's what we mean by it's efficient. Remember, demand curve shows what people are willing to pay. The height of the demand curve shows what people are willing to pay. The height of the supply curve shows what it costs to make. As long as what it's worth to people is more than it costs to make, there's surplus to be gained, right? I'm willing to pay you more than it costs you to make. There's a price between those where we can both be made better off. You leave the market alone, all of those units with willingness to pay greater than the cost to make get made. The market is efficient because we let price serve as that rationing mechanism, that allocation mechanism. Because price is free to move around, it's that price getting bid up or getting bid down that gets the market to find its way to that equilibrium. And in that stable situation, the price is such that all the units that are worth more than they cost to make are being made. If we stop price from serving that allocation role, that as a rationing mechanism, allocation mechanism, there's going to be a cost. There's going to be a cost in terms of surplus lost. There's going to be some other costs too. But a big cost of price ceilings, what we're looking at now, but also price floors. Anytime you stop the price, or taxes, we'll see also, anytime you interfere with the market to stop it from reaching that competitive free market equilibrium, there's going to be a cost, because competitive free market equilibrium is the efficient level of output. It's the level of output where all the units that are worth more than they cost to make are being made, and no units that are worth less than they cost to make are being made. If you interfere with the market and move it away from there, there's going to be some surplus loss. There's going to be some potential gains that aren't happening. So in the case of price ceilings, you can see the free market equilibrium is P0, Q0. Remember, consumer surplus, difference between willingness to pay and price. So the price is P0, we're getting to Q0 units, so the difference between the demand curve and the price there is A plus B. For producers, at P0, Q0, they're getting paid P0, it's costing them MC, this height of the supply curve to make. So C, D, and E is the amount by which the price exceeds their cost of production. So all that potential surplus, the difference between willingness to pay and marginal cost, all of it is being realized. A plus B is going to consumers, C plus D plus E is going to producers. There are no gains from trade that aren't being realized. This is what we mean when we say it's efficient. Every possible transaction that could make somebody better off without making somebody worse off, every possible transaction is happening. All potential surplus, nothing's being left on the table. If we don't allow the market to operate freely, let's say that market price is too high, we say that's not fair. We want to keep the price of gas low so people can afford it. We want to keep rents low so people can afford to live places. There's good reasons for price controls, right? We usually see price ceilings on goods that are necessities, like gas. People need it to get to work and to get places, and housing and things like that. We don't really see price ceilings on flat screen TVs because we don't really care if you can afford a flat screen TV. But so there's a reason we do this, or during the pandemic, right? When the price of hand sanitizer and everything was going up. No, that's not fair. Or after any natural disaster, that's not fair. We need to keep the price low. It can't just go shooting up just because the market would do it, because demand's really high. You can charge a high price, but we're saying that's not fair. Maybe we should say price isn't allowed to go that high. So there's a good reason for it. There are benefits to it. But it's also important with everything we have to say, here are the benefits and here are the costs. And we have to weigh both the benefits and the costs and then decide what we think. But we can't decide what we think by just looking at the benefits or just looking at the costs, because then that's sort of intellectually disingenuous, right? You have to understand both sides and then make your informed decision. So once we put the price ceiling in place, only QS units are going to be supplied. A lot more people want the units, but they can't get them. So only QS units are supplied, price is being kept low. So we're at PC is the price we're charging, and QS is the quantity being sold. And so now you can see producer surplus, they're charging PC and selling QS units. Their surplus is now only E, right? Because you can't get surplus on units that aren't being transacted. So only QS is being supplied at that price. They're not willing to supply any more than that. So that's all the surplus they get. And for consumers, QS units are worth this much to them still, so they're still worth it. They still get A, and they also now get C because the price they're paying is lower. So the difference between what they're willing to pay and what they have to pay. So for consumers, it's A plus C. So what's happened here? Consumers have always had A as part of their surplus, but they picked up area C because price is now lower on those QS units. But they lost area B because those units were generating surplus and they're not happening anymore. Those units aren't being produced and sold anymore. Producers are even worse off because the price they're able to charge has fallen. So you can see they had C, D, and E. Now they've lost C and lost D. There's nothing beneficial for the producer. They lost C. C, you can see. C goes from producers to consumers, right? Those units are still being produced, but now the price is lower. That is sort of, let's call it the smiley face. That's the benefit we're looking for when we impose price ceilings, right? We want people to be able to afford these goods. So we want to keep the price low. So that's the gain. But again, it's a gain that accrues all to consumers, which is fine if you're a consumer. So it's a gain that accrues to consumers. And that's sort of the motivation. We want to keep price low. We want people, again, like I said, we want people to be able to afford things, particularly if they're necessities, if they're things people have to have. We don't want people to be priced out of the market. We want people to be able to afford housing and food and things like that. So C gets transferred from producers to consumers. Consumers are better off because of it. Consumers lose B and producers lose D. Where do those go? They don't go anywhere, right? They disappear. These units just aren't being made anymore. These units from QS to Q0 would have been made at a price at P0, it would have been worth it. But the suppliers are like, if I can only charge PC, that's less than it costs me to make. If I can only charge PC, I'm not going to make those units. So even though you're willing to pay more than it costs me to make, I'm not allowed to charge you that much. And so if I can't charge you a price that covers my cost of production, I'm not going to make it. So all these units don't get made. And that shaded area there, that's the deadweight loss. I'll write it out. Deadweight loss. It's the amount that's lost to consumers and lost to producers, but not gained by anyone. Right? At least C is lost by producers, but it goes somewhere. This is surplus that just disappears. That is the efficiency cost of price controls. In this case, price ceilings, but you'll see the same thing with price floors. If you stop the market from reaching its free market equilibrium, there are going to be units that are worth more than they cost to make that aren't getting made. And so those get left on the table. So that is one of the big costs that you need to think about when you think about imposing price controls. Yes, there is a benefit, but there is a cost. So is this the best way to achieve the goals that we want to achieve? I could say other costs of price ceilings. I mean, one big cost is a deadweight loss, right? That's cost number one. We're losing surplus. There are potential gains that simply aren't being realized because these units just aren't being made anymore. But another thing that sometimes doesn't get thought about enough, and it really ought to in the context of price ceilings, is that when you don't let price serve as a rationing mechanism, when you say we want to keep price low for equity reasons, which is a noble goal, right? If you want to keep price low so those goods are affordable, you've got a shortage, right? If price can't serve as the rationing mechanism, if price can't determine who's going to get those QS units, something else has to, right? at a price of PC, more people want the units than there are units available. How did we decide who gets them? In a freely operating market, it happens because price gets bid up. But if we don't let price do that, we have to use an alternative rationing mechanism. So I'm going to say costs of alternative rationing mechanisms. That sounds kind of jargony. What I'm saying is, if we don't let price decide who's going to get those units, something else has to. You can't choose not to answer that question, right? There's only QS units available, and there's QD people that want them. How do we decide who gets them? And there's a variety of ways we could do this, like first come, first serve, or some sort of lottery, or we could use the black market. We could do things illegally, or we could do, this is not an exhaustive list, but I'm just we just let the seller decide who gets it. There's all sorts of ways we can choose to ration in the absence of price, using price. But it's important to think about each one of those and what the cost is to using them. Right? First come, first serve. That seems fair, right? Because if you can't pay with money, if you really, really want it, you can just go wait in line. You can be the first one there. You can wait all day long. But is that fair if you can't wait all day long? If you have to work to feed your family? If you can't afford to take time off and spend all of that time standing in line? Maybe that's not fair. It seems efficient because if you can't pay this price, but you're somebody that really, really wants it, at least, you know, it may be more efficient because the goods may go to the people that value them most highly. I'll say maybe more efficient because the goods may go to the people that value them more highly. But is it fair? Is it really, can everyone who really values it most highly, can they afford to take time off and go stand in line? Or a lot of what you see is, you know, wealthy people will pay people to go stand in line for them. There are people that are professional line standers. You can find them on Craigslist. So it sounds fair, it sounds better, but there is a cost, and you may end up with just most of the wealthy people getting them anyhow. But at least it gives you a chance. It keeps the price low, so you can go sit in that really long line for gas like in the 1970s, or you can spend all your days scouring the obituaries to see if anyone in a rent control apartment died. You can do all of those things, but there is a cost, and you're also spending your resources doing this, right? If you're sitting there waiting in line for gas, or if you're spending all this time hunting down rent controlled apartments that are available, that's time that has value in other uses. And so you're sort of wasting your resources. You're paying with your time to say how much you value it, but nobody gets that time. Like if you spend 12 hours waiting in line for something, it's not like somebody else gets those 12 hours that you spent, right? It's resources spent to no purpose except to say that you value it really highly. Lotteries, they eliminate that whole waiting in line part, which is great. And so everyone, you just put your name in, whatever, so everyone has the same chance. Nobody has to take resources waiting in line. So that's more, seems more fair. More fair. Everyone has an equal chance. So more fair, but maybe less efficient, in the sense that if we all put our name in for gas, or we all put our name in for this rent controlled apartment, and you have a really low willingness to pay, barely above the price ceiling, and I have a really, really high willingness to pay, I value this good really, really highly, and we both have an equal chance of getting it because it's just a random lottery, that's not really efficient. Goods are very unlikely to go where they're most highly valued if they're just distributed by lottery. So if you want the goods to be allocated where they're most highly valued, that might not be the right approach. And there's no right answer to this, right? I remember in the preschool that my children went to, there was always a lot more people that wanted to enroll than there were spaces available. And when I enrolled my first daughter, it was first come, first serve. So people would wait in line overnight for the thing to open up. And the director really didn't like that. And she was like, and she knew I was an economist after we got to know each other. And she's like, what's a better way to do this? She's like, I don't want everyone spending all their time overnight waiting in line. That just doesn't seem like a good idea. But a lottery didn't seem fair because you really wanted to give the spots to people who value them most highly. So what do? You could raise the price, but they didn't want to do that. They wanted to keep the quality childcare affordable for everybody. So they're keeping the price below market. Didn't want to do this. Last I heard, they were still kind of doing the mix of wait in line and lottery. I'm not sure exactly, but there is no right answer. If more people want a good than is available at the price, and if you're not going to let price rise, you have to figure it out somehow. And every single alternative rationing mechanism has a cost. The black market, that's efficient, but it actually doesn't accomplish anything, right? So you just, instead of charging the ceiling price, you illegally charge more. Or with apartments, the phrase was key money, or it still is actually, with rental housing. Rent controlled housing, you say, oh, you can only charge $1,500 a month for this unit. So I'm only charging $1,500 a month for this unit, but I'm going to charge you $5,000 for your key. So people find ways to get around it. So it is more efficient because the people that are willing and able to pay more get the units, but it's basically, you end up with the same outcome as you would if you just let price ration, except now you have people doing things illegally. So if things are just going to go to the people that are paying the most, probably best just to let them pay the most and not have this whole black market going on. Or it's just like the sellers can just decide who they sell to, which is great, except leaves it wide open, particularly in the housing market. This is a problem for discrimination. Discrimination on race, ethnicity, all sorts of things. But also, interestingly, what we see with rent control a lot is discrimination based on income, right? You've got 2 units, you can sell it to, you can rent it to this couple that makes enough to pay the rent, but just barely, but they're perfectly nice and everything like that. But then this other couple who really wants to live in this rent controlled apartment in San Francisco, they say, yeah, we'll pay the rent. They're never going to have a problem making the rent. They're very stable. Their income's very high. Then they say, oh, maybe we'll replace the flooring. Is that okay? Maybe they have the means to maintain the apartment even without you paying for it. And so there is a lot of situations. Studies have been done sort of looking at rent controlled areas and non-rent controlled areas nearby. And the areas with rent control, you don't get poorer people living there. The idea is we're going to keep the price low so that you can so that people can get in, but if the sellers can choose whoever they want, often they're going to charge the people with a lot of money anyhow. And so again, you get all the costs of rent control without any of the smiley face benefit that we're going for. And that's true. I keep talking about rent control, but anytime, so whenever there is a situation where the price rises or the price is high, and we want to say, oh, let's keep the price low. If we keep the price low and price can't serve as a rationing mechanism, something else will, and we have to make sure that the cost of the other rationing mechanism aren't as great or greater than the cost of just letting price serve as a rationing mechanism. And finding some other way to make the goods affordable to people who can't afford them. Just to finish up here real quick, another cost of any price control, if you keep the price artificially low, if you say you're not allowed to charge P0 for this, you can only charge PC, I have no incentive to provide a good that's worth P0. Again, thinking about rent control. If I have a $2,500 free market apartment and you tell me I can only rent it for $1,500, I have no incentive to keep it up as a $2,500 apartment. I'll just let it deteriorate until it's only worth $1,500. Why wouldn't I? So again, that's not to say that rent control is not a good idea. I mean, we do want to keep prices low, or keeping prices low in the face of like disasters and price gouging. But so yes, there is a benefit to keeping price low, to keeping things affordable, but it's really important to understand not just the benefit but also the costs. If we're not going to let price serve as a rationing mechanism, something else will. And every rationing mechanism has its benefits and its costs. And so you have to say, if we're not using price, what else are we using to determine who gets these units? And what are we gaining in terms of efficiency and equity, and what are we losing if we use any of these alternative rationing mechanisms? So that's not rent control good, rent control bad. That's a normative statement. That's up to you to decide, but you have to think about what's the best way to achieve the goals. What are the goals of rent control or any sort of price ceiling? What are the goals? And is this the policy that achieves it most efficiently and equitably? So understand the cost and benefits.